a special video here, as we're basically today we're kicking off my PlayStation 30th anniversary celebrations because, as you can probably tell, Sony are celebrating their 30th anniversary. Obviously, Sony are celebrating the brand of PlayStation that has been around for 30 years and has changed the way we game in general. They've changed everything that basically have pushed the boundaries of console gaming is essentially. And if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be getting many of the features that PlayStation has today. And I'm sure they've got many future innovations planned for the PlayStation 6, which could be just another, could be 3 years out from now. Just based on all the rumors that are coming out, we could be like 3 years out from the release of the PlayStation 6, which is crazy. They're already could be that far out from releasing it. With that said, I thought we'll have a chance to basically have an opportunity for me to sort of, and hopefully have some friends share some memories of PlayStation and growing up with the PlayStation brand and have a chance to share memories of our love for PlayStation in the last 30 years. And so without further ado, let's begin our celebrations of 30 years of PlayStation, shall we? So yeah, I thought I might as well start the floor considering, yeah, sure, it's my channel and everything. So of course I might as well start the conversation about 30 years of PlayStation. And obviously we have to start, how did I get, when did I get the first ever PlayStation? How did I came across PlayStation? In terms of how I came across PlayStation, I'm pretty sure I got the PlayStation near the end of the 90s. Yeah, end of the 90s was essentially when I first came across the PlayStation brand. Basically got my hands on the PlayStation 1. And that was also, by the way, the first ever video game console I've actually owned, because I didn't own any of the Nintendo stuff that came out before, and in fact, I never even haven't even held a Nintendo console at this point. I haven't even held any of the computer gaming stuff that came out beforehand. So this was the first ever like video game console I ever picked up was PlayStation in general, because that was the first video game console brand that I ever picked up. In terms of the PlayStation 1, what games did I play in the PlayStation 1? I know some will probably be asking. Well, obviously, like most people, I did play Crash Bandicoot. And I think it's safe to say that Naughty Dog, who were the original people who brought Crash Bandicoot into the world of gaming, obviously, because they're the ones who developed the original three games and the Crash Team Racing game that they made. If it wasn't for Naughty Dog, Crash Bandicoot wouldn't be the star that he is today. And obviously, ever since that first ever Crash Bandicoot game, I've just fell in love with the character in the PlayStation 1 era. And it feels crazy to think it took them many years to, it feels crazy that Naughty Dog are not even working on Crash Bandicoot, because obviously the rights went over to Activision, which is really bizarre why Activision has the rights to this brand, this franchise, even though technically it was basically a PlayStation beginning brand, a brand that was within the PlayStation ecosystem to begin with, and it just feels weird that it's now under Xbox now. It's a Xbox franchise going forward, which is, yeah, it still feels weird thinking about it that way. But seriously though, Crash Bandicoot, obviously the first three games I love Crash Team Racing. It was so much fun playing on the PlayStation 1, even though of course the graphics have changed. Obviously graphics were a lot different in PlayStation 1 than they are now. Yeah, it just, well, I mean, obviously of course there was going to be limitations in terms of how the character models looked, because this is the first PlayStation, so obviously Sony were learning as they built each version of the PlayStation. So obviously they were learning about gaming in general and learning technical sides of gaming just to make how, the process of making games more and more. So obviously there were going to be some limitations in the first PlayStation into how the character models were, but luckily the best it could, and it did. Obviously, even though, like I said, the character models might look goofy to some people, I mean, this is what they had to work with in the 90s because of certain limitations. So yeah, they had to work with what they got. Like I said, I loved how Naughty Dog handled it, and it makes me wonder what what a Naughty Dog Crash Bandicoot 4 and Crash Bandicoot 5 would have looked like. I think they would have done some incredible things with Crash Bandicoot 4 and 5 if they were given the chance and if they gave themselves the chance. I think they would have done it. It's just really weird that they would abandon they would move on from the franchise after being responsible for the birth of the franchise, which is really bizarre, isn't it, for Naughty Dog to just give up on the franchise that quickly? I hope that sometime down the road they do revisit the Crash Bandicoot games because they do look very, like I said, it does, because I would love to see make a new Crash Bandicoot game in this day and age and see what that looks like. I think they would do some amazing things. I honestly believe they would do some really good things with it, but unfortunately we're not going to see that because they've obviously they're working on other things now. They're working on Last of Us and probably other projects are being worked on by them. So yeah. Crash Bandicoot was one of the franchises, and then obviously we have Spyro the Dragon, who I believe was worked on by Naughty Dog or Insomniac. I think it's Insomniac, the ones who did the Spyro the Dragon series, which was also is also kind of crazy to think that Insomniac were working on the Spyro series, whereas Naughty Dog were doing Crash Bandicoot, and obviously now Insomniac Games they're responsible for the Marvel Spider-Man series of games, as well as they're working on Wolverine that's going to be coming out maybe in the next year or so. They even were, and then eventually they would get into the whole Ratchet and Clank series. So Insomniac Games have a pretty good portfolio within Sony. And obviously, the fact that they made the Spyro series, I would have loved to have seen Spyro the Dragon. I think they would have done some really cool things with Spyro the Dragon. I would have loved to see what their version of Spyro 4 would have looked like. Even though Toys for Bob are potentially working on a Spyro 4, which could be coming in the next year. Can't wait for that. Please be good. Please be good. Uh, but honestly, though, the first three Spyro games, which Insomniac did, they did a fantastic job. Lives within many gamers' memories, including mine. Will always remember the Spyro the Dragon series that for what it was. Those first three games are the reason why Spyro the Dragon was a success on PlayStation and will never be forgotten as a PlayStation beginning franchise for eternity during the PlayStation 1 days. Yeah. It'll be remembered for that. So that was another game I came across, and then we had some movie tie-in games that came out around the time. The first one I played was a Disney movie tie-in, which was Disney's Tarzan, because yes, Disney released a animation Pixar. Well, I guess you could say it was a Pixar movie, probably the first prototype of the Pixar era of Disney, where they introduced Tarzan. Obviously, Tarzan was obviously a big hit for Disney in the late 98, and they decided to make a film tie-in of Tarzan. Which was actually kind of fun, It was like an adventure game, very well produced, and it had clips from the movie in there. Obviously, they had to release it after the movie was released in the cinemas in order for it to be released because of some of the scenes that they took from the movie that could be considered spoilers for the movie release, obviously. But yeah, it was really great that they did a Disney. It was under the Disney Interactive Games, which was a brand Disney ran for a few years to bring Disney-related characters to video games, and they did it for Toy Story because they brought some Toy Story games in PlayStation 1 era. But obviously Tarzan was the one I remember the most because I never played the Toy Story games back then. So that was the Disney tie-in that I remember playing the most. And then eventually we would have another movie tie-in being Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, which by the way is available on PlayStation Plus right now, for those who might want to relive that game. But yeah, I loved playing the Star Wars Episode 1 because obviously I was a big loved the movie. Because I obviously had the movie on VHS at the time, so of course I was loving that movie, and because of that, I got me the film tie-in, and it was also, I think a lot of people played it at the time, but there was, however, this one bug that happened when I was playing the game where I'm pretty sure I'll be interested to see if anybody else had this issue. But if you were to save the game at any point where just before you died, for some reason, every time I load up a save file, it would load me up as dead, and it would keep looping this death sequence over and over again to the point where I would basically the only way I was able to break it was as if I was to start the game from scratch was the only way to basically overcome that, which was really it just goes to show how buggy sometimes that could happen, like stuff like that could happen where you would basically have like this save file where it feels like it's corrupted because you can't progress the mission because you're in this death even before the game death loop came out, funny enough. But yeah, you would basically be in this loop where Obi-Wan Kenobi would die and or your character would die and you would have to start the game again in order to avoid that bug from happening. So that was a little annoying. I couldn't finish the game, but luckily I'll be able to now. Now it's on the PlayStation Plus for PS5 now, which is good. So hopefully I can avoid. And luckily you can rewind as well with this new version, which is helpful. So hopefully that will prevent that issue from happening to me again, which was pretty bad that happened. But yeah, so that was another movie tie-in I got my hands on. And then, of course, I also got my hands on James Bond tie-in films, which is Tomorrow Never Dies and World Is Not Enough. Tomorrow Never Dies obviously was obviously action-packed. You basically got to feel a little bit like James Bond in the game with the obviously with the weapons and the pistol, mostly the pistol you would be using, and then eventually you would get your hands on other weapons, and then you could finally use those. I guess you could say it was the prototype to shooter-related games that would eventually become bigger as future PlayStations come out and become a lot more advanced. I mean, future illustrations of PlayStation. But either way, it was really cool to be able to live that fantasy of being Bond, James Bond. But obviously, but I will say though, when it comes to World Is Not Enough, there was a mission. I know that considering there is in World Is Not Enough, there is a scene in the movie where Pierce Brosnan goes into what looks like a casino area, right? Obviously, at the time, if you were young, obviously, yeah, this was obviously would be considered red warning signs in gaming because casino related stuff is considered would be considered like sort of gambling in gaming. But back then, obviously, it wasn't. Obviously, there wasn't any online gaming, so luckily there wasn't any online components to that. Essentially, there was a mission during World Is Not Enough where you basically had to beat the dealer in blackjack in order to beat the mission. And if you lost the game, it would count as a mission fail. And I spent quite a few moments trying to figure out a way to beat this dealer in order to beat this mission because I had to basically learn the gist of blackjack, basically learn as much as I could just to be able to beat this mission. And that's crazy to me that I had to basically learn some of the elements of that just to beat that mission. When I did, I was super proud. I had to go through a lot of process to get there, but at least I got it done, and I was able to at least somewhat beat the game, which was good. But yeah, honestly, it was crazy. It was really, really crazy that was one of the missions in World Is Not Enough. But there you go. That just goes to show how crazy those early Bond games were like. Pretty crazy, isn't it? But there you go. That is like I said, that's what James Bond. Curious of what the early Bond games were like on the PlayStation 1. But yeah, apart from that, really, I think they were the most games I played. I don't seem to recall any other games I played on the PlayStation 1. I think they were the most PlayStation 1 games I played mostly on PlayStation 1. Yeah, they were the games I played the most. So then we might as well, considering that, we might as well just move to PlayStation 2, considering obviously this was obviously at a time when obviously DVDs were being introduced into the home media section where you could now, instead of getting VHSs, you could essentially get a DVD player and play movies in a DVD disc. Well, PlayStation 2 has basically introduced the whole DVD player system into the video game, so you could now use a PlayStation 2 to play your movies now. So if you managed to get a DVD of your favorite movie, you could now play it on the PlayStation 2. PlayStation 2 did also have a little bit of network play, but this was like the baby. I like to consider it as baby network, online play, where you essentially had to buy this like separate network adapter, which you would have to plug on the bottom of the PlayStation 2 in order to have some form of network capability in terms of play. But it was only available for select games anyway, because there was only a small amount of games that offered network play, because obviously there wasn't such thing as online play in PlayStation 2, but even though it was just like baby style network play, which was pretty much the closest you could get to online play on PlayStation 2, I suppose. But I never really experienced it, so I wouldn't be able to tell you what it was. I'm sure there'll probably be someone in the conversation who will probably explain further what that is. Essentially, but I will say though, PlayStation 2, I obviously came across some other franchises in the PlayStation 2 era. Obviously, I continue playing James Bond because I did come across the next Pierce Brosnan Bond game, which was a little bit more advanced than the PlayStation 1 days, which was the Nightfire, where James Bond's character model looked a bit more, a little bit more like Pierce Bond's, a little bit more like him compared to the PS1 model they had. And also, it was a little. You could also like drive his car in this one, which was something that you weren't properly able to do in the PlayStation 1 James Bond games. You weren't like able to properly drive the cars like you would able to. But yeah, it was a little bit more better than the PlayStation 1 version because you were able to like drive the cars and use the gadgets on the cars on the Bond games. So you were able to do a little bit more stuff that Bond did in the movies, which was cool. And also you were able to jump up buildings now, which is something that you weren't able to do properly in the PlayStation 1 versions of the Bond game. So there were a little bit more improvements to how game design was working out. So yeah, I played a bit of the Bond games that were coming out for PlayStation 2, not as much as I did in the PlayStation 1 era, but I did come across a game that was like James Bond, but more in a British setting. And in fact, this is a game that many people really hope will get some form of a remaster for the either a remaster or hopefully it comes to PlayStation Plus through the PS5's new PlayStation Plus system. Hopefully it will become a part of the backwards compatibility stuff for PlayStation Plus Premium. Fingers crossed it does. The Getaway was a really cool game. Essentially, it was all set in London, obviously set in the UK, London, where they had this whole storyline of I guess you could say this dealer or mafia style character who steals a guy's child and makes him do work for him, and if he doesn't, the kid dies. If he's late, the kid dies. If he messes up, the kid dies, etc. And kind of builds that whole like tendencies where he has to do this job and he has to be on time and he has to do all these things in order to make sure his kid's alive, which was crazy. Crazy game, and it was also cool because you could drive through London, even though there were times when the game randomly it randomly kept like making these weird like sounds at times where in the original PlayStation 2, if the game got a bit dusty, it makes these weird noises that you would basically have to shut the game down and relaunch it in order for the noise to stop. But it was really cool. The Getaway was quite a fun game to just drive around when you're in between missions, just to take in the London, little bit of the London scenery that they offered in the game, which was cool. So that was a really cool game I came across on the PlayStation 2. And then, of course, I also came across GTA. Yes, GTA. I mean, the GTA franchises, they've had so many memories, haven't they? And then obviously, of course, there'll be a lot of GTA players who are going to remember the GTA 3 as their favorite game. But for me, Vice City was the first ever GTA game I came across. And my gosh, what a game that was. Obviously, you can play it through the trilogy, the trilogy remaster they did back in. Oh yeah, I think it was in 2022 that they did the or 2021 they did the remaster. But yeah, the like I said, the Vice City, the original release of Vice City, it was so cool. We were able to, the fact that GTA gave you the ability to listen to like song like hits from the past on a radio station, and you could switch between radios and whilst you're driving the car. I love this concept of GTA where you could just switch through the radios. You could cause like chaos in the streets, and even if there was an area you couldn't get past, you could simply, and also the fact that they had all these different cheat codes you could use to be able to fly past certain areas you're not supposed to, just to use a helicopter just to explore the area. Even though you might get you might get the comments on you, but at least you were having a chance to explore and take in the atmosphere, which was really great. I just loved the atmosphere of GTA. It was so much fun. Vice City, and then San Andreas, obviously with the whole Los Santos, which is a small part of Los Santos, which would eventually build a much bigger version of Los Santos for GTA 5 a few years later. Which we'll get to that in a little bit. It was those two games I got to play. I also got to play Vice City Stories, where we go back to Vice City, I believe in the 90s, because the first one was set in the 80s, this one was set in the 90s. And then they did the whole Liberty City stories, where we went back to Liberty City about a few years after GTA 3. Those who wanted to relive the Liberty City stuff, and yeah, it was really. But I much prefer Vice City and San Andreas, because they were probably the better GTAs for me. In the PlayStation 2 era. I just loved those games so much. I even played it with my with my cousin as well at the time, and I just loved it. Being able to be able to ride like scooters and all these different cars, and just being able to try out all different cheat codes that were available. It was just so much fun. But obviously, this was at a time when GTA didn't have any like online component, because obviously it was just the single player portion of GTA that was available at this version of PlayStation. Because obviously PlayStation 2 was mainly for didn't have, like I say, it had like a baby version of networking, but not many games were able to support it. And then of course, as well as GTA, I also came across Medal of Honor, which was my first proper, I guess you could say, my first proper shooter series that I came across, which was under the EA umbrella. This was the first ever EA game I came across, which I love Medal of Honor. I honestly am amazed how EA had all this potential for Medal of Honor, and yet they haven't even released a new Medal of Honor game in years. They've just abandoned Medal of Honor because the ideas that because they kind of made a joke out of the franchise after these two releases, which is, with the exception of Airborne, which was, I guess, another good Medal of Honor. But Frontline and Rising Sun were probably considered the heights of Medal of Honor. I mean, Frontline, obviously based on the World War II event, and they did an amazing job doing that whole campaign and being able to relive and basically people to a chance to experience the Medal of Honor's take on the whole World War II story. And then, of course, you've got the Rising Sun, which is essentially their version of looking at their take on the Pearl Harbor story, which would eventually lead to many other sections of that war that would eventually be explored as part of the storyline, which they just did a really good job with the game. And it's just a shame, with the exception of Airborne, the other Medal of Honor just kind of went downhill, just kind of ruined any potential that Medal of Honor had for EA. And it makes me wish that another gaming publisher worked on a Medal of Honor game, because I think it has potential to do some great things. It's just but also at the same time, it doesn't help that obviously there was another shooter that was out in the PlayStation 2 era, which was Call of Duty, that was I guess you could say, was the pretender to take over the Medal of Honor hype. As you will see in the PlayStation 3 era, it would eventually take over Medal of Honor to the point where it's probably another reason why Medal of Honor doesn't exist, because it dominated the shooter genre pretty much. They took the shooter to a whole new level. But obviously, in the PlayStation 2 days, I never didn't come across Call of Duty. But yeah, Medal of Honor was a really great series. The first two games I've ever played, Frontline and Rise of some really good games for the PlayStation 2 for sure. And I also played all the WWE games in PlayStation 2, Just Bring It, Shut Your Mouth, Here Comes the Pain, and even they did a spin-off at the time called WWE Crash. Like I said, PlayStation 2, yeah, they offered the WWE Crash game, which was essentially the first spin-off WWE game where they did this sort of go-kart style WWE meets racing game, which was really clever that they did that. They did like a sort of a go-kart version of the Royal Rumble, which was really clever. They did that, and it was a really really clever experiment that THQ, because obviously THQ were the guys who made the original WWE games. They did an amazing job with that spin-off that they made for WWE. And then obviously let's not forget the birth of SmackDown versus Raw series, which was essentially that carried on the SmackDown gaming series into the Raw versus SmackDown battles that were happening within the games, where they sort of included Raw's name in the title box now because they wanted Monday Night Raw to be represented along with SmackDown, because there was this battle between Raw and SmackDown on the telly during the time, because they did this whole Survivor Series battle between the two brands transpire into the game as well. Which was really clever. But yeah, it was really yeah. So they basically started the whole SmackDown versus Raw stuff for 2005, 2006, 2007, which were the the 2007 WWE game was the final one they released for PlayStation 2. So that was either way. I got to play those for the PlayStation 2. All the WWE games for that generation, obviously. And then eventually we come to, yeah, so I think, yeah, and then I got to play some other PlayStation 2 games as well. Checked out a couple of other games as well within the PlayStation 2. I got to play the Legends of Wrestling with some other games that came out on PlayStation 2 era that, yeah, I think, and I also got me Driver 3 as well. I got me Driver 3, and I kind of remember playing the Sims Hit and Run. I think I played a bit of that, but because I think I rented it from Blockbusters at the time, so I was only able to play it for a bit. But I do briefly remember playing the Simpsons Hit and Run. But yeah, Driver 3, I remember playing a lot of that. Also Burnout, a bit of Burnout. Obviously, yeah, so I got to play a bit of Burnout that was available for PlayStation 2, because they had some pretty cool Burnout games on from EA. Yeah, so I got a chance to play quite a bit of game franchises that were starting to emerge with the PlayStation 2.